Okay, now we are ready to start the painting part of our lesson. What we will be working with today is a scene that is the peace after the storm has been calmed. So this is a peaceful sunrise type picture here. We're going to start with our blue, some white, and then our yellow, peach, pink, pale purple, darker purple down here in the water. And then gradually you'll notice a lot of the sky colors up here are blended. Down here in the water, most of them stay separate to give us that wave texture. We are going to be careful that our complementary colors don't mix and give us mud. Down here you'll notice that there's purple and yellow right next to each other, but not blended. We'll get there. And then we're including some white up here in the sky so that we don't mix our blue and yellow and get green. That will also be fairly straightforward once we get started here. One of the tricks with canvas texture is that it's very difficult to erase a pencil mark, but without pencil lines, it's difficult to make sure that you're following what you actually intended. So today I'll show you a trick so that you won't get lost on your painting. I have a thin light board. I like it a lot. It's very handy, lightweight and durable. I honestly don't remember the brand or anything. I can look that up if we need to. I also often will just use the window because that's always handy. What I've got today, and what you'll find in your handout, is a printed outline or line drawing of our lighthouse with some rocks and a horizon line. We are going to use the rule of thirds to make sure our horizon line is somewhere interesting and our lighthouse is somewhere interesting, so we can kind of visualize thirds like that. So we probably want to put our horizon around here. A little higher, a little lower is going to be fine. And we want our lighthouse not to be in the dead center, but probably on this third, just the way the rocks are drawn this time. So instead of drawing this again from scratch, we can place it behind our canvas. You kind of gotta eyeball it. If you're holding it up to a window, you can see it a bit, enough to get it lined up. And then once you've got it basically in place, put some tape on it. Once you have your light source immediately behind it, it becomes a lot easier to see. So I'm going to turn on my light board. Looks like I need another piece of tape to keep it tight. I'm using washi tape because that's what I have handy. You can use any tape as long as you can get it back off again. All right, that's better. So now I can lightly trace what I have on my line drawing. I don't need all of the lines because once I start painting, I'm not necessarily going to continue to see them anyway. But it's good to get the big lines in, kind of like a road map, and then you can fill in things after the fact by looking back at your drawing for reference. I don't know if you can actually see my line drawings or not. They're very faint because I don't want to have to put a bunch of paint somewhere that I didn't really want to, just to cover up my pencil lines. All right, I'll call that good. Oh, my stripes here. Stripes and my door. Little rock. Okay. Now, one of the teachers at our grade school is going to teach her kindergarten class how to do this painting in a similar way because it is very easy. She actually has several of these wooden lighthouses that her class is going to be putting on top of their paintings. If you were to do that or something similar, you would draw your horizon line in an interesting area with our rule of thirds, probably the same place. You could draw a bunch of rocks or even just one simple rock over here. And then the best place for this lighthouse is still in line with that rule of thirds. You could do it over here too. It'll just be to make your rocks kind of flow the same way or a reflected way. So if I was to use this, I would paint everything the same. I would paint my rock, and then I would go back and glue this lighthouse in place on top of the painting once it's dry. Okay, I'm going to get my light board out of the way. Here are the colors I'm using today. You can spend a fair amount on paints, but I don't usually. These are $1 or less at Michael's or Joann's or wherever I happen to be when I need another color. We're going to start with our Robin's Egg Blue. You can put some on a plate or in a palette, and then with a brush dot it onto the canvas, or if you're careful, you can put little dots on our canvas. Blue at the top. This is like toddler size toothpaste serving size. That's how we measure things at our house. And then a little bit of white so that we don't have green in our sky. And I put the yellow next. Just a touch of this peach. It's really just to sort of help blend the gap between the yellow that I have and the coral that I have is fairly dark. So I wanted to make sure it was a soft enough color. I'm going to paint the sky first because it's all one wash. I'm not going to put paint down in my ocean just yet. Okay. I'm using, I believe this is a 3/4 inch brush. Yes, 3/4 inch. You could use an inch brush. I wouldn't go much smaller than 3/4 of an inch because you're tempted to try for detail, and this is not the time or place for details. So what we're going to do is, starting with our brush vertically like this, we'll pull our colors across the page. Our blue. And then white. And yellow. And our peach. I always like it when I get to the coral part. It's so pretty. You'll notice if you're looking at your brush now, this is focusing funny, I'm sorry. Where's it going to focus? Well, on your brush, you can see that there is white and yellow here. Here I've got more of my coral. So depending on where my brush is in relation to the paint, I can change what color I have on my brush or on the canvas by just rotating my brush a little bit to use the colors I've got on there. But they're not sharply delineated because I've always been blending them already. Okay. Now we'll come down here to our purple. Try to avoid painting the lighthouse with sky color. If you do part of it, that's probably fine, but if you can avoid the center, the light part of our lighthouse. So come up close. Just like you're painting a room, you kind of edge in. from your walls and your corners and ceilings. And then you can freely paint next to it. All right. If you see any sharper edges, you can go back and smooth those now. You can also take your colors that are on the brush right now, kind of smush in little cloud shapes a little higher. I'm kind of finding I'm running a little dry with my paint, so I'm going to come back up here. It's a little more, I should clean my brush. Just gonna wipe it with some paper towel and squeeze most of the water out because I don't want to add a bunch of water to my canvas. Get the blue out. I'm going to use coral to move the other colors around a little bit more. Get a little bit on my brush. When you're working with the sky, it's important, I think, not to have too many up and down strokes. As you're filling in any space, try to always be moving horizontally. If you look up at cloud shapes, you will notice that there are lots of different cloud shapes, and some of them appear to be more vertical than horizontal. But there is still a horizontal direction to them. You'll notice when you're really looking at the sky that all the clouds that you're seeing have a flat bottom so that they all sort of sit on whatever, I don't know what it's called, whatever level of the atmosphere they're in. Kind of tap in some clouds up here. Just a little scooch them in. I'm going to use my purple again at the bottom. Put that right down there. Okay. Now my sky is mostly blended. I'm checking for any rectangular looking brush strokes. I think everything's looking okay. Let me get out my darker purple and blend a little bit. Mine is it's called Royal Violet. It's pretty intense. So I'm just going to tame it a little bit with my lighter purple just to get a little bit more richness down here. I do want to make sure that this part is smooth, otherwise it will blend in with my water texture too much. Okay, I'm gonna call that good. Now with our water, we'll start nearby here. Put a tiny bit of the dark purple near the horizon. A little bit more of the light purple and coral. White. That's my Robinson blue. Now for layering purposes, I'm going to do the top part of my water, and then I'm going to take a quick break and paint my rocks so that when I get to this bottom part of my water, I can have some of it curl up around the rocks more tightly than if I were to paint this area separate and count on borders to keep that separate from my rocks. So I'm just going to get I don't have any gray paint apparently, so I'm using black and white. Actually, I might use some of this peach too. I like that. The peach helps a lot, actually. One fun thing to do when you're using a lot of color in your sky is to use that same color to sort of highlight like a thin layer haze on your other elements in the art that you're doing. It helps everything tie together. You know that strange light quality you get when like there's a summer storm and it clears away and suddenly everything just has this sort of vibrancy, or when the sun is setting and everything has that sort of orangey tone to it. That's what you're doing then when you're carrying some of these sky colors into your art down below. All right, water. So I'm going to start here. Now instead of going like this, or up and down primarily, I'm doing horizontal strokes primarily with the thin edge of my brush. I'm on a flat horizon line, but then after that, pretty much everything is going to have just a little bit of swoop to it. It blends into my lighter purple here. Coral. A little more coral paint on the surface than I want, so I'm going to pick some up with my brush. These color dots are not the only place we necessarily want the color. So I can go back on top of some of these other colors above it with the light peach here like I'm doing. So that kind of makes it look like there's little bits of reflection on some of the waves in the back as well. Same with the yellow. As you come to the foreground, you can make some of these strokes a little bit more wavy. Here's our white. Oh, I said I was going to do my rocks first. So I'm going to scrape off that paint so I can use it later. Squeeze my paint out of my brush. All right, rocks. See, now I can just put my rocks on top of a little bit of the purple ocean, and it's much easier than trying to stay in the lines for both of them. I also have a smaller brush with me. It's probably more like a 1/4 inch. You could use that for these rocks along the edges if you want. I tend to just use the same brush for everything and feel like it's easier, but it takes a little more care around these edges like this. Doesn't have to be exact, they're rocks, so you can kind of squish your brush down as you have put more pressure on it. You'll squeeze the edges out a little farther. Gives it a more unpredictable edge. It's very difficult to draw a random scribble. More paint. If you're deciding to put a lighthouse on top of your painting, I would probably bring the rocks all the way down to the bottom of the page so that it can be as much, it can feel like it's right in the foreground, where in this line drawing version, the waves closest to us are really our foreground, and this is sort of in the middle. I have a little bit more black on my brush now. I'm just going to tuck in some, apparently I don't have enough, tuck in some shadows, some lines in the rocks, and blend them a little bit just to give us a little bit more depth. You can do a lot with just scooching your brush. You don't have to actually draw a lot of the edges. Now I can put some highlights back on here if I want. A couple little white spots. Maybe even some yellow. I think I'll put some on my palette. White. Yellow. If I were to clean out my brush between my rocks and grabbing some of the highlight colors, I'm going to have to work a lot harder to make the colors blend. But if I already have half of the other color in my brush already, my brush will do most of that for me. Same with the shadows. Okay, I'm gonna call that good. I'm gonna go back to the water, but I don't want my rocks to be in my water, so I'm gonna actually wash my brush this time to make sure I've got nice bright colors at the bottom. Just dry my brush out as thoroughly as possible. Just squeeze it good. Okay, squeegee it out with your thumb and finger. Okay, back to waves. I'm being careful by the gray because I don't want to pick up too much with my brush. As long as I've got paint on my brush, I'm going to be putting down paint before I'm picking up anything. So you can get in there if you're careful, and as soon as you notice any gray on your brush, stop and squeeze it off. And with our blue. Now, if you would like, you can go back in and tap very carefully in with your lightest colors. And if you just touch the kind of flared out bristles to your painting down here, it will look like the spray as waves are kind of smacking into the rocks. They're not big waves because our sea is fairly calm now, but there's always a little bit. If you accidentally, like I did, got some of your rock color into your water, you can go back and add more of your watercolor on top. Whoops. I got a lot of my yellow up for my purple. So now I am squeezing out the extra paint that I had in my brush that I forgot about. I'm pulling it back because I scraped that paint off. I'm still moving in wave shapes. I'm pulling in whatever paint nearby happens to be damp still. I'm going to add a little bit of my purple again. There we go. It's always tempting to overblend or overwork. Usually, like right there, it really would have been best if I just hadn't touched it. But you can pull it back if you're careful. All right, that's my water. I'm going to call that done. Now we need our lighthouse. If you are using a cutout piece, this will work much easier for you. The rest of us are going to have to do some detail work. So this lighthouse could go on top like so, but we're going to paint ours. So this is where it would be far more useful to have this small flat brush. Usually, maybe it's because my brushes are all old. The edge is not, you can't get a good straight edge unless it's a little damp first. So I always get my brush damp before I attempt anything. You can choose whatever color I guess you want your lighthouse to be. I'm using red and white. I've got red. Use the straight edge of your brush as your, whenever possible, as the straight edge of your art. Rather than trying to draw a straight line, use the tool that you've got in your hand already. You do need to be careful where your hand gets on these waves. The sky is probably dry enough to touch. I often use my pinky on my paper or on my canvas as a little bit of a stabilizer so that my brush can be above. If I don't, my hand shakes just enough to make it more difficult. But with my pinky down, it's much easier to be steady. Okay, there's that red. With these stripes, it's a little trickier because there's straight edges on all sides of what you're painting. Now that I'm not in the middle of my painting, I can use, I'm bracing my forearm on the table so that as my hand hovers above the lighthouse, it's not shaking. You often don't think your hand is shaking until you're trying to draw a straight line with a dark color near a light color. And then all of a sudden you realize how much your hands move. Okay. I'd kind of forgotten that I wanted my sky to be visible through my railings. So I'm going to take a little bit of my purple and scooch it in along the edge here. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to be putting black lines on top of it. It'll blend. I'm noticing my lighthouse isn't very straight. And I'm going to work with it because you can fix a lot. But what you can't fix, you need to remember, is still artwork. If you wanted an exact representation of a lighthouse at sunrise, you would go to a lighthouse at sunrise and you would take a picture. But we're not doing that because we want to spend time thinking about it, playing with colors, and doing it our own way. All right. This light part. I'd like to keep as white as possible, but because I found mine is not very straight and I want to make the light a little wider, I'm using some white and some of my pale yellow. I think that works. Okay, now look around. See if there's any other spots you need to fill in before you outline it with your black. Looks like my rock is a little shy of the building. I'm gonna make this a red door. This might be a good place to switch to my detail brush. That's so much easier. Okay. I already have black here. It would probably be best to wait until my painting is dry. It really doesn't take very long with acrylic. But if my painting is dry, it's much easier for me to go back in and do my outlining. But I'm not gonna wait today. So I might pull up some of my color. I'm all right with that. We're just gonna go ahead. Outlining it in black is a style choice. Obviously the lighthouses that you see along the coast of Lake Michigan, for example, are not outlined in black. So you don't need to do that if you don't want to. But I find it helps give some definition. If you aren't confident with using a detail brush to make straight lines of even thickness, you might want to practice using a marker to go back in and do these outlines. Make sure it's going to do what you want it to do first on a scrap piece of paper. My detail brush is getting worn, so it's got some stray hairs on here. I could trim them, but I'm just going to slick them down for now, so I don't make my lines furry. There. I think I'm going to add a couple edges to some of my rocks. That's more edge than I wanted. I can tap it with my paper towel and pull off quite a bit of it. Blend it in. That didn't go as planned. So I'll scooch some of this in there. There. Right. I might add a couple of birds because they're easy. It makes it look more like the sea. Farther away the bird, the easier it is to draw. So none of my birds are going to be very close. But there's a few. Okay. Now sign it. I would recommend using a pen. I'm going to put my name down in here, probably somewhere. Every time I try to sign my name with a brush, I regret it. So I really do recommend a fine tip marker. If you're brave, you may try it. You can always paint over your rock with gray again. You've done it. You painted your sunrise and sea. I hope that you found the process peaceful. I also hope that you're happy with your painting. If you're not completely happy with it, and if there were parts of this that were frustrating, please practice. Try again and try again soon. The more you do this, the easier it will become, and the more intuitive all of these decisions about color and about where to place things like those clouds becomes. I also hope that you take this experience and use it to encourage you to really look at your surroundings. As you're driving in the car, maybe if you're riding in the car, look at the sky. See what colors are there, what the clouds look like, how it's put together, how the light affects the area around you. Look at illustrations of sky and pictures and magazines. Look and see what really is there. There's a lot that you can do that can be inspired by the sky. The last thing I wanted to mention was that if you did want to add lettering to your painting, do so after everything is dry. I don't recommend just freehanding your lettering on, because the last thing you want to do is spell something wrong on top of a finished painting. So what I would do is either print out the lettering from your computer or write your lettering on a piece of paper like we did with our lighthouse. Once you have it the way you would like it and it's the correct size, you put it back underneath your canvas. The area that we painted in the sky is the thinnest paint. It might be the easiest place for your lettering. So you'll trace it on top of your painting with another very fine light pencil mark. And then you can fill that in with marker or the paint of your choice. I hope that goes well for you. I'd love to see your results. If you do finish a painting or if you use another media to do a similar thing, I'd love to see that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. God bless your day.